Hi everyone, thanks for joining me today. Today's presentation is brought to you by Telecom, and the presentation surrounds the case study of a large financial institution. Now, you can see here on the screen that the challenge was actually understanding and centralizing the assets of telecom, IT, and employee information. So we initiate a service management approach to all three of these different elements and understand the whole lifecycle management. In addition to this, we wanted to identify a way to best automate and track asset ownership and enhance end-user visibility at the same time. The dilemma at this moment in time was not one market was catering to this large initiative. So, for instance, telecom expense management was not getting it done. ITSM was not getting it done. There was no solution that was actually addressing each one of these different needs that were required. Provisioning tools were not getting it done. And also the automation tools that are out there at the time were not getting it done. And the reason for that is because this solution that was required extended across three key components. That was the automation and streamlining of business processes. But in addition to that, that was also having an inventory storage and management tool. So basically that was going to serve as the foundation of the system. That inventory had to track telecom, had to track IT assets, also had to track employee information at the same time, and the movement of all three elements. And the last component behind this was also financial. So financial information came in two forms. It had to come in either generated charges that were assigned to services, or secondly, charges that actually originated from external supplier invoices that were actually brought into the system, assigned to the correct service, charged back correctly, and of course had to be passed through to an AP system at the time. So deployment factor is key. So when we actually look at the deployment of a solution of this nature, the first dilemma, the first issue that we actually ran into had nothing to do from the technical side. It was simply understanding and installing a philosophy that would catch hold within the bank's culture. So for us to do this, we actually had to have an easy-to-use interface. We had to extend the solution into the user base to actually get buy-in from the end users at the same time. In addition to this, we also had to have increased levels of automation. So these increased levels of automation were actually introduced into the tool simply because we wanted to have a mechanism in place to ensure that end users constantly were aware that they had to tend to specific new requests that were actually part of this tool. What I mean by that is understanding that they would now have a different responsibility to manage their assets, and they were involved in the process. So there was some different business logic that actually had to be applied to this. So individuals now were forced to basically okay any of the assets that they actually had in place. From a technical side, things differ just a little bit. So for us to facilitate and actually get this solution off the ground, we identified that it would be best served to actually have this solution deployed behind the client's firewall. In addition to this, we also wanted to plug directly into the Active Directory system through shared authentication. So this meant that deploying this or extending this information out to the end users, they could actually log in via the intranet and using their network credentials and actually access the information that they had to. In addition to this, we also recognize the value of being deployed on the intranet and perhaps extending it more or creating more of a portal type solution that sliced and diced the information specific to the end user who was actually logging in. So in addition to this, this solution actually was deployed in 2006. So what we actually had in place at the time was understanding exactly where we needed to locate information. So for instance, you can see here we had HR information, accounting, asset, and service information. There were baseline storage areas for this, or data sources for this info. What we had to do is start recognizing the value of plugging into specific systems, gathering and consolidating all this information into one tool. At the time when this system was first deployed in 2006, there were 70,000 plus assets that were being managed. So this has actually increased significantly, and we'll address that further as we go through the presentation today, but this has increased significantly as time has gone by. And of course, with something like this, we actually had a large training component. Reason being is there were not necessarily the individual end users who had to view their information, but in addition to this, we also plugged into the change management processes of the bank. We actually had the whole service desk processing orders directly through this system. So for us to actually do that, we of course needed to train them, and they tell us all had the resources and had the time and effort, and we actually successfully trained over 30 plus users on how to use this system going forward and place orders over voice, data, and IT assets. And the last piece is, of course, the security. So, of course, we need to be deployed behind a firewall. One of the initiatives that we had to take in mind was for us to be deployed internally within the bank, we had to cater to and ensure that we were actually compliant with the internal IT policies of the bank. So the solution had to be technically sound, and of course we needed to ensure that we were embedded into the actual different policies that were within the bank, and we successfully did that. Some of the results that came out of 2006, there was an immediate identification of unused services. This is very interesting because this produced a large savings number. The irony behind all this is we are labeled a telecom expense management company, but at this moment we actually recognized these numbers, these unused services. We actually had not processed one invoice. This was all done simply by calibrating the provisioning and actually tightening up the association of assets to the individual. But not only that, but actually incorporating the individual themselves into the process so they could see firsthand what services they had and basically take action on it. So 2009, the solution started to expand. So what you can see here is, of course, at this point we've actually had incorporated data and voice telecom services into the tool. Now we started to roll in some of the IT assets at the same time. In addition to this, we had you can see here we had a significant increase of the number of telecom assets and the number of IT assets that were being managed through the system. And of course, at that point, as I mentioned earlier, we had 36 employees who were involved in the service desk or the help desk. They were basically actively now trained up in processing orders directly through the tool. The result of this was an astounding 99% of assets were actually being controlled. So basically what that meant was we had now installed that philosophy that actually was the catalyst behind this entire project, and that was in ensuring that ownership of every single asset was actually identified back to a single employee who was accountable for it. That was accomplished. Some of the results that came out of this, you can see here, we have a number of employees now who are actually actively power users within the system. You can see 150 different users are actually coming into the tool. The second bullet is quite interesting. Of course, if there's any other financial institutions that are watching today, this automation and 3,000 pending deletes and pending transfer transactions that are happening each month, this is regarding transits. Basically, we have put forth a strategy that is successfully managing who's in what transit and at what moment. And basically, if anybody is switching transits, we are ensuring that we have the technology and the automation in place to ensure that that's a streamlined process going forward. That has saved numerous man hours. You can see here, the third bullet down, 330 man hours have actually been saved on this solution at the same by the bank. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have been deployed in a shared authentication environment. So basically, we have plugged directly into the AD. And one of the other results of this is we are across IT and telecom, but that actually includes 60 plus different types of services that are now being actively managed within the tool. All these services are collected and redistributed back out to the end users. So they have full visibility into what services they have, what we actually have them on record as owning, and secondly, they can actually take action on any of the services. So basically, if there's an end user and they identify that they don't necessarily need that conference bridge any longer, they can view it and they can actually take action on that service directly through our tool. This is a personalized portal now going out to 70,000 users. It's quite a significant achievement. So of course, I do thank you today for joining us. And of course, if there are any questions, the information is on the screen. Please feel free to contact us here at Telesolve. And again, I thank you for the time. Bye-bye.